At 68, billionaire CEO Dorothy Wilson overhears executives mocking dinosaurs who can't retire. Determined to uncover the truth, she disguises herself as a cleaning lady in her own company. What she discovers will break your heart. When they thought no one was watching, they revealed who they truly were. Little did they know, the old cleaning lady held their fate in her hands. The boardroom of Wilson Technologies gleamed under crystal chandeliers, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Manhattan. At the head of the mahogany table sat Dorothy Wilson, her silver hair styled in a sophisticated bob, dark skin glowing against her crimson power suit, shoulders squared with the confidence of someone who had fought for every inch of her throne. As founder and CEO of a Fortune 500 tech empire worth billions, Dorothy commanded respect without demanding it. At 68, she had the sharp eyes of a woman who could spot a flawed algorithm or dishonest executive from across the room. 25 years, she announced, her voice rich and authoritative, silencing the room of 30 board members and top executives. 25 years since I convinced the first investor that a domestic worker with a night school computer science degree could revolutionize financial technology. Applause erupted. Dorothy acknowledged it with a slight nod, her expression measured. Success wasn't new to her. It had been hard-won through decades of persistence. Her phone vibrated. An unknown number. Normally, she'd ignore it during such an important meeting, but something, perhaps the instinct that had guided her career, made her glance down. Your company has been systematically pushing out older employees and individuals from humble backgrounds. Insiders are fast-tracking their friends. Evidence in Blue Folder, Storage Room 302. Dorothy's heart thumped against her ribs, but her face betrayed nothing. As champagne was poured and congratulatory speeches continued, her mind raced through fragmented memories. 28 years old, scrubbing floors in a brokerage firm at night, eavesdropping on discussions about emerging markets while executives assumed she was invisible. 34, pitching her first financial algorithm to investors who asked if she was presenting on behalf of the actual developer. 43, securing her first major contract after 7 years of rejections, her daughter sleeping on a cot in their garage-turned-office. 50, featured on the cover of Businessweek as the improbable success story, the article focusing more on her background than her innovations. Now, at 68, her company employed over 10,000 people globally. She had built meritocracy into its DNA, or so she believed. The message threatened everything. To Dorothy Wilson, whose vision transformed an industry. The COO raised his glass. As glasses clinked, her phone rang again. Jason Mercer, her ambitious 38-year-old chief marketing officer who sent his regrets for missing the celebration due to a strategic client emergency. Dorothy, wish I could be there. Paris sends its love. We've nearly closed the European expansion deal. His voice oozed charm. In the background, music and laughter contradicted his emergency meeting excuse. Minutes later, Megan Taylor, head of HR, called with similar effusive apologies. The Singapore team needed immediate consultation on those restructuring metrics we discussed. Dorothy thanked them both graciously, but a new sharpness focused her attention. These were the same executives she'd need to investigate. As the room raised another toast to 25 more years, Dorothy's gaze drifted toward the windows. Rain had begun to fall, droplets racing down the glass like tears. She had built this empire by seeing what others missed. If qualified people were being pushed aside for personal connections under her watch, she would uncover it, no matter the personal cost. When Dorothy Wilson decided something, nothing stood in her way. The blue folder lay open on Dorothy's mahogany desk, its contents spread before her like evidence from a corporate crime scene. Performance evaluations with suspicious patterns. Stellar employees suddenly receiving mediocre reviews after their 50th birthdays. Emails detailing culture fit concerns about workers who'd come from modest backgrounds. Photos of retirement parties, where the guests of honor wore expressions of shock rather than celebration. One image showed a group of executives laughing at a whiteboard where someone had drawn a pyramid labeled Wilson Tech Ecosystem. At the top, young innovators, fast track. At the bottom, legacy staff, phase out. Dorothy's own words about fresh perspectives had been twisted into justification for gradually pushing out veteran employees. She closed the folder, her fingers trembling not with age but with rage. The anonymous tip had been right. The meritocracy she believed she'd built had been corrupted, reshaped into an exclusive club that mirrored the very barriers she'd spent her life breaking down. The corner bakery in Queens hadn't changed in 40 years. Dorothy inhaled deeply as she pushed open the door, the warm, sweet scent of cornbread instantly transporting her back to her early days. Mrs. Jenkins had always brought cornbread from this very shop to share during lunch breaks at the cleaning company. Mrs. Jenkins lived above the bakery now. At 92, her body had grown frailer, but her mind remained sharp as the winter air outside. Her apartment was modest but immaculate. Walls covered with photographs of former employees who'd become doctors, business owners, and, in Dorothy's case, industry titans. "I've been expecting you," Mrs. Jenkins said, her weathered hands closing over Dorothy's manicured ones. The contrast was stark. One pair of hands had scrubbed floors for decades, the other had signed billion-dollar contracts, yet both belonged to women who understood what it meant to be underestimated. "How did you know I'd come?" Dorothy asked, accepting a steaming mug of tea. "Because that folder finally reached you." Mrs. Jenkins smiled knowingly. "Some truths can only be seen from the bottom, never from the top." "What's happening at my company?" Dorothy began. "Is what happens when power forgets its origins," Mrs. Jenkins finished. "The question is, what will you do now?" Back in her penthouse that evening, Dorothy stood before her mirror, removing her designer earrings. The woman who stared back had climbed from poverty to prosperity through brilliance and determination. But had she become so focused on the climb that she'd forgotten to look back? The solution came to her with stunning clarity. If the truth couldn't reach her at the top, she would have to descend to find it. She picked up her phone and dialed Mrs. Jenkins' cleaning service, now run by her granddaughter. "This is Mary Jenkins," Dorothy said, adopting the slight rasp and gentle cadence of her mentor. "I'd like to apply for a night cleaning position at Wilson Technologies." As she spoke, Dorothy began pulling the pins from her styled hair, letting the natural gray curls spring free. The transformation had begun. The mirror reflected a stranger. Dorothy had hidden her elegant silver bob under a gray, slightly disheveled wig. Her designer wardrobe replaced by a worn navy uniform bearing the Jenkins Cleaning logo. Thick framed glasses, deliberately chosen one prescription too weak, made her squint slightly, and subtle makeup accentuated the lines around her eyes and mouth. Most striking was her posture. The commanding presence of Dorothy Wilson had vanished, replaced by the stooped shoulders and hesitant movements of Mary Jenkins. Even her own daughter wouldn't recognize her now. She practiced Mrs. Jenkins' slight vocal tremor and the humble deference she'd observed in service workers who'd become invisible to the powerful. The final touch, hands roughened by special stage makeup to mimic decades of harsh cleaning chemicals. "First day jitters?" asked the supervisor, handing her a rolling bucket and mop. "Don't worry, just stay out of the executive's way and you'll be fine. They don't like being reminded that someone has to clean up after them." Dorothy nodded nervously, playing her part perfectly. She pushed her cleaning cart toward the elevator bank in the gleaming lobby, her heart pounding with an unfamiliar anxiety. This building bore her name on the cornerstone, yet she felt like an intruder. The warning came too late. A group of young executives burst through the main doors, engaged in animated conversation about quarterly projections. Too absorbed in their discussion, they barreled directly into Dorothy's cart. The bucket toppled, sending soapy water cascading across the marble floor and soaking Dorothy's shoes and uniform pants. "Watch it!" snapped a young man in a tailored suit, jumping back to protect his Italian leather shoes. "Someone should really keep the maintenance staff away during business hours," laughed a woman with a sleek ponytail. "These dinosaurs belong in museums, not navigating modern office buildings." They continued walking, stepping around the puddle without offering help, their laughter echoing in the vast lobby. No one noticed the flash of steel in Mary's eyes before she lowered her gaze and began mopping up the spill. ID badge? The security guard at the executive floor barely glanced at her. Dorothy fumbled in her pocket for the cleaning staff badge. I need to service the conference rooms before tomorrow's meeting. No service staff on the executive floor during business hours, he said dismissively. New policy. Someone might mistake you for a visitor. The way he said visitor made it clear what he meant. Someone who didn't belong. But the schedule says, Look, Grandma, the guard interrupted, you seem confused. The associate floors are cleaned at night. The executive floor gets day service from the premium team. You're clearly not on that team. As Dorothy retreated to the service elevator, she noticed a familiar-looking young man hurrying down the hallway. Something about his profile, his gait. Without her proper glasses, she couldn't place him, but a nagging feeling persisted. She'd seen him before, somewhere important. The first piece of a puzzle she didn't yet understand had just fallen into place. The offices after hours possessed an eerie stillness, broken only by the soft squeak of Dorothy's cleaning cart wheels. As Mary, she now had unfettered access to the spaces that executives assumed were private once they left for the day. Screens remained unlocked, presentations left open, and confidential documents scattered across desks by employees too accustomed to the cleaning staff being functionally invisible. In the marketing department, Dorothy paused at an illuminated computer screen. A PowerPoint slide glowed with the heading, Strategic Talent Refresh Initiative. She leaned closer, her heart sinking as she read bullet points about removing stagnant elements and prioritizing dynamic perspectives. Another slide showed data on improved innovation metrics following the voluntary departure of employees with outdated skill sets. What hit Dorothy hardest were quotes from her own motivational speeches embedded throughout the presentation. Her words about embracing change and valuing fresh vision had been weaponized into a systematic push to edge out experienced workers from humble backgrounds in favor of younger, well-connected recent graduates from elite universities. Dorothy's stomach clenched as she recognized the assessment system on another screen. The Wilson Performance Matrix had been her creation 20 years ago, a revolutionary evaluation tool designed to measure contribution beyond traditional metrics, giving those from non-traditional backgrounds a fair chance to shine based on actual impact. Now, someone had modified her system. The matrix looked familiar, but the scoring had been fundamentally altered. Points were now awarded for cultural alignment, networking effectiveness, and image projection, subjective categories that inherently favored those with privileged backgrounds and connections. A spreadsheet showed employee rankings, with red highlighting around names of staff over 50 or from working-class backgrounds. Notes in the margins like potential voluntary retirement candidate and consider for restructuring package made the intentions clear without stating them explicitly. Dorothy leaned against the desk, momentarily forgetting her disguise. The system she had built to create opportunity had been perverted into a mechanism for exclusion. The realization felt like a physical blow. "Mary, there you are. Could you wait outside for a moment?" Dorothy startled as Jason Mercer, her CMO, appeared at the door. She lowered her head and nodded subserviently. Inside the glass-walled conference room, Jason and Megan Taylor set up a video call. As the screen flickered to life, Dorothy watched herself, the real CEO Dorothy Wilson, appear for a scheduled evening update. "Dorothy, thanks for making time," Jason gushed, his entire demeanor transforming into respectful deference. "The European expansion is proceeding exactly as you envisioned." On screen, Dorothy nodded approvingly as they presented polished updates and strategic plans. The call lasted 15 minutes, ending with effusive praise from both executives. The moment the call ended, their expressions changed. "God, these late-night check-ins are ridiculous," Megan groaned. "The corporate dinosaur just doesn't understand modern work culture." "Well, someone needs to babysit her while we actually run the company," Jason laughed. "Did you see her trying to understand the algorithm updates? Like explaining rocket science to my grandmother. How much longer do you think before she finally steps aside?" Megan asked, gathering her papers. The board's already quietly discussing succession planning. Her time's almost up. They walked past Dorothy without a glance, as though she were merely part of the furniture. Later that night in her penthouse, Dorothy stood under the shower's hot spray, trying to wash away the day's revelations. For decades, she'd prided herself on building a company where talent trumped background. Where had she gone wrong? Had her pursuit of success blinded her to what was happening in her own company? Had her frequent travels and focus on expansion created this toxic environment? Most troubling of all, had her own words and policies unwittingly laid the groundwork for this betrayal of her core values? As water streamed down her face, Dorothy confronted an uncomfortable truth. She had helped create this monster. Now she would have to destroy it, even if it cost her the empire she'd spent her life building. Rosa Mendez arrived at the reception desk at 5:45 a.m. each morning, though her shift officially started at 8 a.m. Dorothy, as Mary, noticed this ritual during her third day, when she was finishing the night shift cleaning. Rosa meticulously organized files, checked all systems, and prepared coffee for executives who would arrive hours later, never acknowledging her early efforts. "You're here early," Dorothy commented one morning, emptying Rosa's trash bin. Rosa, startled. Few people spoke to her beyond giving instructions. "I have to be." They increased my workload after letting my assistant go. Said it was budget optimization. Over the next few days, Dorothy timed her cleaning schedule to overlap with Rosa's early hours. She learned that Rosa, 58, had been with Wilson Technologies for 19 years. Despite speaking 4 languages and holding an administrative degree, she remained a receptionist while younger employees with connections were promoted around her. "Last year, I applied for the executive assistant position," Rosa confided one morning. "The feedback? I lacked contemporary communication style. Then they hired the CEO's golf partner's daughter, fresh out of college." Dorothy's throat tightened. That must have been difficult. It was. But at my age? Rosa shrugged with practiced resignation. "I have bills to pay. Sometimes visibility isn't worth the risk." The break room incident occurred during Dorothy's second week. She was mopping near the executive lounge when Jason Mercer and Megan Taylor entered with 3 other senior managers, all engaged in animated conversation. "¿Terminaste con los nuevos criterios de evaluación?" Jason asked Megan in fluent Spanish. "Sí," Megan replied. "El comité los aprobará sin preguntas." "Nady quiere parecer anticuado." Dorothy kept her head down, continuing to mop methodically. After years working with Latino employees in her earlier days, she understood every word about their new evaluation criteria, that the committee will approve without questions because no one wants to appear outdated. "¿Crees que la vieja señora de la limpieza entiende lo que estamos diciendo?" One manager chuckled, asking if the old cleaning lady understood them. Jason glanced dismissively at Dorothy. "Imposible. Probablemente tiene demencia senil. ¿Cuánto tiempo crees que durará antes de que tengamos que reemplazarla también?" Dorothy's knuckles widened around the mop handle as Jason speculated about how soon she'd need to be replaced due to senile dementia. Megan laughed, suggesting they start a betting pool on how long the old woman would last. "Apuesto $50 a que no dura un mes." Another executive joined in, betting $50 she wouldn't last a month. Throughout the conversation, Dorothy maintained her facade perfectly, occasionally pausing to rub her lower back as though pained, reinforcing their perception of her as physically diminished. Inside, however, her analytical mind catalogued every name, every remark, and every alliance revealed in their casual cruelty. Back in her apartment that evening, Dorothy spread out notebooks across her dining table. In meticulous detail, she had mapped the company's actual power structure, not the one on the organizational chart, but the hidden web of relationships, favors, and alliances. Color-coded notes identified which executives socialized together outside work. Annotations detailed who protected whom during meetings. Asterisks marked employees from privileged backgrounds who'd advanced unusually quickly. Red circles highlighted capable veterans being systematically sidelined. This wasn't just information gathering, it was strategic warfare planning. Dorothy approached the problem like a chess grandmaster, identifying key pieces and calculating multiple moves ahead. Her years negotiating complex business deals had honed this ability to identify leverage points and predict behavioral patterns. While cleaning the executive floor late Friday evening, Dorothy noticed Janet Chen, her longtime executive assistant, working late. Unlike other executives, Janet always acknowledged cleaners, even offering Dorothy a kind smile and thank you. As Dorothy emptied her trash, she noticed Janet carefully tucking documents into her designer handbag rather than leaving them in the office or discarding them. The papers were labeled Executive Compensation Review, Confidential. More intriguing was a small notebook Janet quickly covered when Dorothy approached, a notebook filled with handwritten notes from meetings Dorothy herself had never attended. Janet smiled apologetically. "Sorry for the mess. Long week of meetings." Dorothy nodded deferentially but filed away this crucial observation. Janet had always seemed unquestionably loyal. Now she appeared to be documenting something she didn't want others to see. Either an ally or a complicated player in the game unfolding before her, Dorothy couldn't yet determine which. The marketing department's quarterly celebration remained in full swing well after normal business hours. Dorothy, mop in hand, lingered at the edges, invisible to the revelers despite being in plain sight. This invisibility had become her most powerful tool. "To exceeding our targets by pushing out the dead weight," toasted a young director, champagne sloshing from his flute. The gathered executives cheered, their inhibitions loosened by alcohol and the presumed privacy of after-hours celebration. In a corner, projected onto a screen meant for presentations, a slideshow played on loop. Evolution of Wilson Tech. Each slide featured side-by-side employee photos, one labeled Past, showing older employees or those from visibly humble backgrounds, the other labeled Future, displaying their younger, polished replacements. Captions like Experienced to Energetic and Traditional to Trendsetting attempted to reframe what was happening. Dorothy's stomach churned as she recognized the face of Henry Okonkwo, a brilliant engineer who had helped build the company's foundation, juxtaposed against a recent Yale graduate whose father sat on the board of a major client. The caption read, "Technical to Visionary." "The best part," a vice president slurred to colleagues, "is how we've gotten the old guard to train their replacements before they even realize they're being phased out. It's beautiful, really. They think they're mentoring the future while digging their own graves." The laughter that followed chilled Dorothy to her core. "Mary, perfect timing." Dorothy turned to see Megan approaching, her designer heels unsteady after several drinks. Behind her trailed a group of executives, all holding their phones with camera apps open. "We need a real-world demonstration for our visiting partners," Megan announced loudly. "They don't believe our story about our prehistoric cleaning staff." Before Dorothy could respond, Megan deliberately poured her iced tea onto the freshly cleaned floor, creating a large puddle. "Oops, cleanup needed." The group erupted in laughter as Megan gestured dramatically toward the spill. "Mary, be a dear and show everyone how it's done." Dorothy stood frozen, her disguise suddenly feeling like a trap rather than a tool. The executives stared expectantly, phones raised. To refuse would break her cover. To comply would submit to their humiliation. Slowly, she knelt beside the puddle, her knees protesting against the hard floor. As she began to mop, camera flashes punctuated the laughter. "This is why we need youth and vitality," Megan narrated as if giving a corporate presentation. "Look at that arthritis in action. This is what happens when people don't know when to retire." "Take your time, Grandma," someone called out. "We're documenting this for posterity." As Dorothy finished cleaning, someone else remarked, "This is where old ladies belong, on their knees cleaning up after their betters." More photos, more laughter. Dorothy kept her head bowed, not from shame but to hide the dangerous gleam in her eyes. Later that night, while cleaning the conference rooms, Dorothy discovered a calendar invitation left open on a laptop. "Restructuring consultation, after hours only, NDA required." The meeting was scheduled with external consultants from McKinsey for every Thursday evening. Meetings never reported to the CEO's office. Dorothy photographed the screen with her phone. These weren't routine operational changes. They were planning something major, deliberately kept off the official calendar. The question was, what exactly were they hiding from her? As she moved to the executive suite, Dorothy found herself drawn to a photo on Jason's desk she hadn't noticed before. It showed a young boy with his mother at what appeared to be a company picnic from decades ago. The woman looked familiar, and in the background, barely visible, was a younger Dorothy herself. She squinted through her weakened glasses, bringing the photo closer. The child was undoubtedly Jason, but the woman. Dorothy suddenly remembered Eleanor Mercer, a talented colleague from her early days. Eleanor, who had been her closest competition for advancement before mysteriously leaving the company. Dorothy carefully replaced the photo, her mind racing. This wasn't just about corporate politics, this was personal, and she was beginning to understand why. Hidden in the labyrinth of digital files, Dorothy uncovered the true mechanics of what she now thought of as the system. Scanning training schedules during her night shift, she found two distinct tracks: leadership acceleration and standard development. The criteria for placement seemed arbitrary until she cross-referenced participant lists with HR records. The privileged leadership acceleration track featured intensive workshops with industry experts, international conferences, and one-on-one executive mentoring. Its participants shared striking similarities. Most were under 35, came from prestigious universities, and had connections to existing executives or important clients. The standard development track, thinly disguised as equally valuable, consisted primarily of outdated online modules and occasional group seminars on topics like adapting to workplace change. These sessions were scheduled during lunch hours, making attendance difficult for many. The participants in this track were predominantly older employees or those from working-class backgrounds. Most alarming was an internal memo outlining what they called visibility metrics, a system that tracked which employees received meaningful exposure to senior leadership and clients. The numbers revealed a stark pattern. Employees in the standard track received virtually no visibility opportunities, making their eventual underperformance in networking-dependent evaluations a foregone conclusion. "It's elegant in its cruelty," Dorothy whispered to herself. "They've created a perfect trap." The discovery happened purely by accident. Dorothy had noticed the same group of employees accessing a rarely used conference room in the basement every Tuesday evening. Curiosity piqued. She arranged her cleaning schedule to bring her to that floor during their meeting. Through the door's narrow window, she witnessed something extraordinary. 15 employees, all veterans of the company, all from the standard development track, had transformed the forgotten space into a vibrant innovation hub. An older Indian engineer was demonstrating algorithm improvements on a whiteboard. A middle-aged black woman presented market research that contradicted the official reports upstairs. A white-haired programmer in his 60s showcased a mobile interface prototype that was years ahead of the company's current offerings. Dorothy slipped inside, pretending to empty trash bins. No one questioned her presence. The cleaning staff were invisible after all. "The biggest flaw in their quantum encryption approach," explained Rajiv Patel, a 62-year-old engineer who'd been with the company for 2 decades, "is that they've overlooked the vulnerability at the human-system interface. I've developed a patch, but 3 attempts to schedule meetings with the development team have been postponed indefinitely." "Add it to the vault," sighed a woman named Sarah. "Maybe our next company will appreciate innovation regardless of its source." The conference room pulsed with a unique energy that had vanished from the executive floors. Colorful post-it notes covered one wall in an intricate mind map. The air smelled of coffee and possibility. Hushed voices carried tones of both frustration and determination. Most striking was the tactile quality of their work. Dog-eared notebooks filled with handwritten equations, physical prototypes you could touch and feel, sketches with coffee stains and margin notes. This wasn't the sterile, presentation-ready work produced upstairs, but something raw and genuine. Dorothy could almost taste the authenticity in the air. "Professor Williams?" Dorothy nearly dropped her mop when she recognized the elderly man emptying trash bins in the engineering department. Dr. Robert Williams had been her most influential professor in college, a pioneering computer scientist whose theories had helped shape her approach to technology. "It's Mary, isn't it?" he responded with a kind smile. "New to the night shift?" "What are you doing here?" Dorothy asked, momentarily forgetting her disguise. "You should be leading the research division, not emptying trash cans." He chuckled softly. "I was, until last year. 27 patents for this company, and then a new director informed me my cognitive processing speed might be incompatible with contemporary development cycles. They offered a consulting position that never materialized. This job helped supplement my pension." "That's outrageous," Dorothy whispered. "It's surprisingly common," he replied, "though I find it interesting that you, a new cleaning person, recognize a computer science professor." Dorothy froze, realizing her mistake. "My son took your class." Professor Williams smiled knowingly. "Is that so? How fascinating. Perhaps we should talk more about your son sometime, Mary." In the solitude of her apartment, Dorothy's dining table had transformed into an intelligence center that would impress the CIA. Voice recordings, carefully labeled and time-stamped, filled her secure cloud storage. Photographs of incriminating emails and documents lined up in neat digital folders. Her journal contained meticulous notes of every conversation she'd overheard, with particular attention to patterns of behavior. "Evidence must be irrefutable," she murmured, organizing her findings into categories: preferential treatment, systematic exclusion, manipulation of evaluation metrics, and personal vendettas. She'd spent decades in boardrooms where powerful men tried to discredit her with claims of misunderstanding or exaggeration. This time, they wouldn't have that luxury. Most damning were the recordings of late-night strategy sessions where executives openly discussed how to encourage voluntary departures of employees they deemed culturally outdated. The clinical language couldn't disguise the underlying message. People with decades of loyalty to Wilson Technologies were being methodically pushed toward the door to make room for connected newcomers. As she reviewed a particularly revealing conversation about optimizing human resources for the modern era, Dorothy's phone buzzed with a news alert that made her blood run cold. Breaking business news. Apex Technologies launches Wisdom Council. Apex Technologies, Wilson Tech's fiercest competitor, had just announced a bold new initiative, a Wisdom Council comprised entirely of industry veterans with 25-plus years of experience. The press release featured smiling faces Dorothy immediately recognized: Henry Okonkwo, Sarah Lieberman, David Chen, all former Wilson Technologies employees who had chosen early retirement within the past year. Apex Technologies recognizes that innovation doesn't have an expiration date, the company's CEO was quoted saying. While others chase youth at the expense of experience, we're harnessing decades of knowledge to solve tomorrow's challenges. The article detailed how this group had already developed a revolutionary security protocol that experts were hailing as 10 years ahead of the industry. The protocol built upon research that Henry had attempted to present at Wilson before being sidelined. Dorothy's phone rang immediately, her actual CEO phone, not her Mary burner phone. It was her actual assistant, sounding panicked. "Dorothy, have you seen the news about Apex? Jason Mercer is asking for an emergency meeting to discuss our innovation pipeline issues." The irony was almost too perfect. The same executives who had pushed out these brilliant minds were now scrambling to respond to innovations they had rejected. "Mary, the coffee service for the emergency executive meeting is completely inadequate." Jason Mercer's voice boomed across the executive floor where Dorothy was dutifully polishing the glass walls of the conference room. Inside, the tension was palpable as executives prepared to brief the CEO, who they believed was calling in remotely, about the Apex situation. "We specifically requested premium coffee service with proper china, not these paper cups," Jason continued, gesturing dismissively at the perfectly adequate coffee station. "This meeting determines our response to a major competitive threat. Details matter." Dorothy nodded apologetically. "I'll fix it right away, sir." As she hurried to replace the cups, her hand trembled slightly, intentionally, causing a few drops of coffee to splash onto Jason's pristine white shirt cuff. "For God's sake," he exploded, drawing attention from everyone in the room. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. This is why we don't have people past their prime in important positions. They can't even handle basic tasks without making a mess." The executives around him nodded in solemn agreement. One added, "The market moves too fast for the technologically challenged. In today's world, inability to adapt is a liability we can't afford." Dorothy dabbed at his sleeve with exaggerated concern and shaking hands, causing him even more frustration. "Just stop. Go find someone competent to replace you for this meeting." Jason dismissed her with a wave. "We need precision today, not sentimentality about keeping people in roles they can no longer handle." Dorothy shuffled away, head bowed, but not before catching a final, crucial exchange on her phone's recording app. Later that night, Dorothy discovered a messaging group called Early Retirement Initiatives on a company server that had been left inadequately secured. The group included Jason, Megan, and several other senior managers discussing strategies for pushing out targeted employees. "Remember, never put pressure directly," Megan had written. "Increase workload gradually, exclude from key meetings, then express concern about their declining performance. After a few months of this treatment, most will leave voluntarily." Jason had replied, "The best part is when they think it's their own decision. Much cleaner than formal termination and no risk of age-related lawsuits." Another executive added, "The technology comfort assessment is genius. No one over 50 passes it, yet it's impossible to prove it's anything but a legitimate business requirement." Dorothy saved everything, her hands steady despite her rage. The pieces were fitting together perfectly now, a comprehensive picture of methodical exclusion disguised as progress. And she finally had enough evidence to act. The soft sound of muffled sobbing led Dorothy to the executive women's restroom on the 42nd floor. Following her cleaning routine, she pushed her cart inside to find a woman hunched over the marble sink, shoulders shaking with each quiet sob. Dorothy immediately recognized Lisa Johnson, one of the few black women in senior management. At 54, Lisa was a marketing genius who had pioneered several of the company's most successful campaigns. Her office walls, which Dorothy had cleaned for weeks now, displayed industry awards and thank you notes from grateful teammates. Tonight, however, this accomplished woman looked utterly defeated. "Are you all right, ma'am?" Dorothy asked gently, maintaining her merry persona. Lisa startled, quickly wiping her eyes. "I'm fine, just allergies." The practiced lie of professional women who couldn't afford to be seen crying at work. Dorothy began methodically cleaning the counters, creating a reason to stay. Sometimes it helps to talk, even to a stranger. Nobody pays attention to cleaning staff. We're good secret keepers. Something in Dorothy's gentle tone broke through Lisa's professional veneer. "They're pushing me out," she whispered, voice cracking. "After 15 years of exceeding every target." Dorothy nodded encouragingly, her mop moving in slow, deliberate strokes across the floor. "I just received my quarterly evaluation," Lisa continued, holding up her tablet. "Suddenly, I'm underperforming in categories that didn't even exist in previous reviews. Digital adaptability, youth market intuition, contemporary communication style." As Lisa scrolled through her evaluation, Dorothy's rage built beneath her carefully controlled expression. The assessment was clearly engineered for failure. Lisa had been rated poorly on nebulous metrics while her actual accomplishments were minimized or ignored entirely. "My campaign increased market share by 18% last quarter," Lisa explained, pointing to a tiny footnote acknowledging this fact, buried beneath paragraphs of criticism about her traditional approach. "The most insulting part?" Lisa continued. "They assigned 3 recent graduates to support me, all connected to board members or clients. They take credit for my work in meetings I'm suddenly not invited to." Dorothy nodded sympathetically. "That seems unfair." "It's not just unfair. It's frightening," Lisa admitted, her voice dropping. "I was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer last month. If my performance rating stays this low for another quarter, I'll be moved to part-time consultant status. I'll lose my health insurance right when I need it most." She showed Dorothy her calendar, chemotherapy appointments scheduled during early mornings and late evenings to avoid missing work. "I can't afford to lose this job. Not now." Dorothy's hands tightened around her mop handle. "Have you spoken to HR?" Lisa's bitter laugh echoed off the bathroom tiles. "Megan Taylor runs HR. She's the one who designed this new evaluation system." Dorothy was connecting the final dots when Lisa's phone chimed with an urgent email. Reading it, Lisa's face drained of color. "They've scheduled a performance intervention meeting for tomorrow morning. This is how it started with Henry and Sarah before they were pushed out." Dorothy peered at the email. The meeting agenda made the intentions crystal clear. This wasn't remediation, but preparation for removal. More disturbing was an attached document accidentally included in the email chain. A spreadsheet titled Q3 Compensation Reduction Targets, with calculations showing how much executive bonuses would increase for every senior-level employee transitioned to consultant status. "They're not just pushing out experienced employees," Dorothy breathed. "They're converting your salaries directly into their bonuses." Lisa stared at the spreadsheet in horror. This is methodical. They're targeting everyone over 50 or from non-traditional backgrounds. It's purely about money. They get bigger bonuses by replacing us with younger, cheaper employees they're connected to. While claiming it's about fresh perspectives and digital natives, Dorothy added, momentarily forgetting her disguise. Lisa looked at her curiously. "You seem to understand corporate politics unusually well for—" The bathroom door swung open as Jason Mercer entered, stopping short at the sight of them. "This is the ladies' room," Lisa said coldly. "The men's is being cleaned," he replied dismissively before focusing on Lisa. "Preparing your defense for tomorrow? Don't bother. The performance metrics are objective." He turned to Dorothy. "Why are you standing around chatting? You're paid to clean, not give management advice." Dorothy lowered her eyes, returning to her mop. "Sorry, sir," Jason sneered. "Get back to your bucket, old woman. Leave the business discussions to those qualified to have them." As he led Lisa away, Dorothy caught the dangerous flash in Lisa's eyes, the look of someone with nothing left to lose. Another ally was emerging, and just in time. The storm arrived without warning, a late autumn tempest that slammed into Manhattan with hurricane-force winds and torrential rain. By 7 p.m., transit systems were shutting down, and Mayor Bloomberg had declared a state of emergency. Nearly 20 employees remained stranded at Wilson Technologies headquarters, including 6 executives, various staff members, and Dorothy, still disguised as Mary, the cleaning woman. "The building management has shut down the elevators as a precaution," announced the security guard. "Everyone needs to remain on this floor until the storm passes. Could be hours." The executives immediately commandeered the largest conference room, ordering delivery from an upscale restaurant that somehow managed to send a courier through the dangerous conditions. The other employees gathered in the break room, sharing vending machine snacks. Dorothy shuffled between these worlds, invisible yet seeing everything. In the conference room, with rain lashing against floor-to-ceiling windows and thunder shaking the building, executives loosened their ties and kicked off their shoes. As the storm isolated them from the outside world, their guard came down. "Since we're stuck here," Megan suggested after her third glass of wine, "let's finalize the restructuring list. No time like the present." On a whiteboard meant for brainstorming innovation, they began listing names under 2 columns: Phase 1 transitions and high potential replacements. Dorothy recognized every name in the first column, veteran employees who had built the company, now deemed dispensable. "Mary, come join us," Jason called out, spotting Dorothy as she collected trash. His false joviality, amplified by alcohol, was more unsettling than his usual contempt. "We need entertainment while we're trapped by this biblical deluge." Dorothy cautiously approached the group of executives lounging around the conference table, their faces flushed with expensive wine and power. "Tell us your life story, Mary," Megan prodded, an amused smirk playing on her lips. "How does someone end up as a cleaning lady at your age? Didn't you have ambitions?" Dorothy carefully constructed a response that was both truthful and disguised. I wanted to be a computer programmer, actually. Started taking night classes back in the 80s. This revelation was met with uproarious laughter. A programmer? Can you imagine? Jason wheezed. Mary here probably thinks Java is still just coffee. What happened to that dream? Asked another executive, visibly entertained by what they considered poverty tourism, a brief, amusing glimpse into a life they believed they were too talented to ever experience. Dorothy described the real barriers she had faced decades ago: financial hardship, family responsibilities, lack of connections, only to be constantly interrupted. That's the problem with your generation, Megan interjected condescendingly. Always an excuse for why you couldn't succeed. Meanwhile, my niece taught herself coding in high school and had 3 job offers before graduation. Oh, you're like a walking museum exhibit, Jason added, taking another photo of Dorothy for what he called his corporate anthropology collection. Fascinating to see a fossil still walking around in the modern world. The group roared with laughter, raising glasses in mock toast to Mary, the would-be programmer, completely oblivious to the fact that their entire digital infrastructure ran on systems originally architected by the woman they were ridiculing. In the employee break room, Dorothy slipped away to refill paper towel dispensers in the adjacent restroom. As she worked, a young man entered, startling when he saw her. Oh, sorry. I didn't know anyone was in here. Dorothy recognized him immediately as the familiar face she'd noticed earlier, the young man from the IT department who had caught her attention. Up close, the resemblance was undeniable. The same determined set of the jaw, the same analytical gaze that Dorothy saw in the mirror every morning. No problem, she answered carefully. Just doing my job. The young man hesitated. You're new to the cleaning staff, aren't you? I'm Marcus. Mary Jenkins, Dorothy replied, continuing her work. Marcus stepped closer, lowering his voice. That's interesting, because Mary Jenkins was my great-grandmother's name. My grandmother used to tell me stories about her. Dorothy froze, her heart hammering. Marcus Wilson Grant, her daughter Aisha's son, the grandson she barely knew due to her relentless work schedule and strained family relationships. What are you doing here, Marcus? She whispered, maintaining her disguise but acknowledging the connection. The same thing you are, Grandma, he answered quietly, trying to understand what's really happening in this company. Dad said you received some troubling information. I took an IT internship here 3 months ago to see for myself. Does your mother know? No, just Dad and me. We wanted to help without interfering with your investigation. The storm raged on, but inside Wilson Technologies, new alliances were forming. In a quiet corner of the building's east wing, Dorothy and Marcus huddled over his laptop, their silhouettes illuminated by occasional lightning flashes. I can access all the secure servers, Marcus explained, his fingers flying across the keyboard. They never suspect the night IT support guy. I've been tracking their communications, documenting the systematic pattern of pushing out experienced employees. Dorothy watched her grandson with newfound respect. I've been gathering evidence too, but I can't access the encrypted executive files. Marcus smiled, the same determined smile she'd worn countless times before major business coups. That's where I come in, Grandma. By morning, we'll have everything we need. Outside, the storm began to subside, but inside Wilson Technologies, a different kind of tempest was brewing, one that would soon break with even greater force. The company-wide email arrived with a bold red, urgent flag. Jason Mercer announced an all-hands meeting, mandatory attendance, scheduled for 10 a.m. the following day in the company's main auditorium. The subject line read, Strategic Realignment. Wilson Technologies' Future Direction. As Chief Operations Officer, the email stated, I've been authorized by our CEO, Dorothy Wilson, to lead this critical session outlining our new organizational vision. Ms. Wilson will be represented at this meeting but has entrusted the leadership team with implementing necessary changes to ensure our continued market dominance. Dorothy, still maintaining her Mary identity, read the email on her phone while cleaning the executive washroom. The audacity was breathtaking. She had authorized no such meeting, approved no strategic realignment. Jason was using her name to orchestrate his own agenda. More troubling was the final paragraph. This meeting initiates Phase 1 of our talent optimization program. Department heads will receive confidential documentation regarding staff assessments and transition plans immediately following the presentation. The wheels were already in motion. Whatever Jason planned to announce would irrevocably alter her company unless she acted quickly. With Marcus's help, Dorothy accessed Jason's personal drive that night. There, buried in a folder labeled Family, she found a document that made her blood run cold. The Wilson Reckoning. Eleanor Mercer's Legacy. The document contained news clippings, personal journal entries, and emails spanning decades. Eleanor Mercer, Jason's mother, had been Dorothy's closest colleague during Wilson Technology's founding years. Brilliant and innovative, Eleanor had worked alongside Dorothy developing the core algorithms that launched the company's success. One journal entry from Eleanor read, "Dorothy and I should have been partners. We built the original framework together, dreamed the dream together. Then suddenly I was pushed aside, my name gradually removed from presentations, my contributions minimized. When investors came calling, I became Dorothy's technical support rather than her equal." Photo after photo showed a younger Dorothy and Eleanor together at industry events, their expressions changing over time, from mutual excitement to Eleanor's growing resentment and Dorothy's oblivious advancement. The final pages revealed the devastating conclusion. Eleanor had suffered a nervous breakdown after being passed over for the CTO position that Dorothy had promised her. She'd left the industry entirely, raising her son as a single mother while battling depression. She'd died of cancer 5 years ago, her potential largely unfulfilled. The last page was a letter from Eleanor to Jason. Don't let her company continue as a monument to broken promises. She built her empire by stepping on others. Make it right, my son. Dorothy sat back, memories flooding in. Had she really sidelined Eleanor? In those early chaotic days of building the company, Dorothy had been singularly focused on success, on proving herself in a world determined to deny her a seat at the table. Had she become so fixated on breaking through barriers that she'd failed to see she was erecting new ones? Had her determination to succeed, despite her background, blinded her to Eleanor's contributions? Jason's motivation suddenly became crystal clear. This wasn't just business. This was deeply personal. He blamed her for his mother's derailed career, for growing up watching his brilliant mother's potential wither while Dorothy soared to fame and fortune. Her grandson touched her shoulder gently. "Grandma, there's more you should see about tomorrow's meeting." The auditorium buzzed with nervous energy as employees filed in the next morning. On stage, a podium displayed the company logo beside elaborate digital displays showing charts of productivity metrics and talent optimization frameworks. Jason and Megan conversed in hushed tones while staff settled into their seats. Dorothy, dressed in her cleaning uniform, had been instructed to dust the stage and arrange water glasses for the executives. As she worked, Jason approached the podium for a microphone check. "Perfect timing, Mary," he said loudly enough for nearby executives to hear. "We need the stage looking immaculate for the announcement. Our CEO may be calling in remotely, and everything must be perfect." As Dorothy arranged water glasses, Jason accidentally bumped the table, sending a glass toppling. Water cascaded onto Dorothy's shoes and the stage floor. "Oh no, I'm so sorry," he announced with exaggerated concern and a barely concealed smirk. "Can you clean that up quickly? And maybe try not to get in the way during the presentation?" As Dorothy knelt with a cloth to dry the puddle, Jason turned to the gathering executives. "See what I mean about efficiency? This is why we need to move forward with our plans. Watch how long it takes her to clean a simple spill. In today's business environment, we simply can't afford these delays." Laughter rippled through the group as Jason continued, now addressing Dorothy directly through the microphone. "Careful there, Grandma. Don't slip and break a hip. We'd hate to lose our company mascot." More laughter. Dorothy kept her head down, not from shame but to hide the dangerous gleam in her eyes. The time for observation was ending. The time for action was about to begin. The auditorium lights dimmed precisely at 10 a.m. as Jason Mercer took the stage, his custom Italian suit and confident stride projecting the image of a natural successor. The massive screen behind him illuminated with the slogan, "Wilson Technologies, the next generation." "Today marks the beginning of our company's most important transformation," Jason began, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone who had rehearsed in front of mirrors. "For 25 years, Wilson Technologies has been an industry leader. But to remain at the forefront, we must evolve beyond outdated models and outdated thinking." The emphasis on outdated sent a ripple of uncomfortable murmurs through the older employees in the audience. Dorothy, still mopping the water from the stage's edge, kept her head down but her ears alert. "Our data speaks for itself," Jason continued, revealing complex charts showing productivity metrics. "Employees with contemporary skills and fresh perspectives generate 42% higher innovation outcomes than those with traditional backgrounds." Dorothy noticed immediately how the axes were manipulated to exaggerate differences. A closer look would reveal that the 42% higher innovation referred only to patents filed, not patents approved or successfully monetized. The subtle deception was masterful. "Before we outline our transition plan," Jason said with practiced enthusiasm, "I'm thrilled to announce that Wilson Technologies has just been awarded the prestigious Abernathy Prize for Corporate Inclusion." On cue, Megan Taylor joined him on stage with a gleaming crystal trophy. Applause filled the auditorium as photos appeared on screen showing carefully selected company events where visible diversity had been highlighted for the cameras. "The selection committee was particularly impressed by our statistics," Megan explained, displaying a slide titled Inclusive Excellence. 48% of our workforce represents diverse backgrounds, and we maintain age diversity with employees ranging from 22 to 68 years old. What the slide didn't show, what Dorothy had discovered in the hidden files, was that the 48% diverse workforce included predominantly junior positions with little decision-making authority, while the age diversity statistics concealed that employees over 50 were concentrated in departments scheduled for restructuring. A representative from the Abernathy Foundation appeared on the video screen, offering congratulations. "Wilson Technologies exemplifies how modern companies can embrace all voices. Your commitment to creating opportunities regardless of background is exactly what our founder envisioned." The irony was almost too painful to bear as Dorothy watched employees who were secretly on the transition list applauding their own impending removal. As Jason moved from the award to introduce the Strategic Realignment Plan, Dorothy continued cleaning around the stage perimeter, gradually working her way closer to the executives. When Jason paused to take a sip of water, she spoke, softly at first. "Excuse me, but those numbers don't add up." Jason nearly choked on his water. "What was that?" "The innovation metrics," Dorothy said, her voice growing stronger, though still maintaining her merry persona. "They only count initial submissions, not successful implementations." A stunned silence fell over the auditorium. The cleaning lady was challenging the COO's presentation. "And the 48% figure," Dorothy continued, leaning on her mop handle, "doesn't distinguish between positions of influence and entry-level roles, does it?" Jason's face flushed crimson. "I think you're confused about your place here. Perhaps you should finish your cleaning duties elsewhere." "It's just that," Dorothy persisted, moving her cleaning cart closer to the slide showing employee satisfaction rates. "These surveys were only distributed to certain departments. I clean the HR office. I saw the restricted distribution list." Megan stepped forward, her professional smile strained. "Mary, this is really not appropriate. And that age diversity claim," Dorothy continued, undeterred. "Shouldn't you mention the average tenure of employees over 50 is dropping by 8 months every quarter? I may be just a cleaning lady, but even I can see when numbers are being manipulated." The audience was now fully engaged, whispers spreading through the rows as Jason's carefully orchestrated presentation began unraveling thread by thread. Jason's practiced poise crumbled as he stared at the elderly cleaning woman who had just dismantled his carefully constructed presentation. The auditorium had fallen into a charged silence, hundreds of employees frozen in disbelief at the unexpected confrontation unfolding before them. "I don't know who put you up to this," Jason hissed, striding toward Dorothy with barely contained fury. "But this is completely inappropriate. Security will escort you out immediately." Megan quickly joined him, positioning herself between Dorothy and the audience, her voice dripping with condescension. "With all due respect, ma'am, these are complex business metrics that require years of analytical expertise to properly interpret. Perhaps, in your position, you're not seeing the complete picture." Dorothy continued, wiping down a nearby table, seemingly unfazed. "I understand numbers just fine. What I don't understand is why a company founded on merit would manipulate data to push out its most knowledgeable employees." Jason's face flushed crimson. "You're a cleaning woman. What could you possibly know about corporate strategy or data analytics?" "That's enough," Megan snapped, forgetting her professional demeanor. "Return to the maintenance department where you belong. This is a business discussion for qualified professionals, not service staff." Dorothy straightened slightly, her voice carrying throughout the now silent auditorium. "Isn't that interesting? When confronted with legitimate questions about your data, you don't address the concerns. Instead, you dismiss the source because of their position. That tells me everything I need to know about your leadership philosophy." Jason stepped closer, his voice low but intense. "Go back to your mop and bucket, old woman. The real world moves too fast for dinosaurs like you. There's a reason we don't let janitors make business decisions." Dorothy stood motionless for a long moment, absorbing the weight of Jason's contempt. Then, with deliberate slowness, she reached up and removed the gray wig that had been part of her disguise. Her natural silver hair, elegantly styled despite its compression, caught the stage lights as she stood to her full height. The stooped posture vanished. The shuffling gait disappeared. She removed the thick, incorrect glasses and fixed Jason with the penetrating gaze that had intimidated titans of industry for decades. "Actually, Jason," she said, her voice transformed from Mary's hesitant tones to Dorothy's commanding contralto, "I've been making business decisions since before you were born." A collective gasp swept through the audience as recognition dawned. "I am Dorothy Wilson," she announced, each word crisp and powerful. "Founder and CEO of this company, which I built from nothing while scrubbing floors at night to pay for my education." The microphone she'd secretly attached to her uniform carried her voice to every corner of the stunned auditorium. "For weeks, I've been working among you as Mary Jenkins, watching, listening, and learning what happens in my company when people think I'm not looking." Jason stumbled backward as if physically struck. Megan's professional mask shattered completely, her mouth opening and closing without producing sound. "I've cleaned your offices, emptied your trash, and listened to your conversations," Dorothy continued, her gaze sweeping across the executive team. "I've witnessed how you treat people you consider beneath you, and I've seen what you've been doing to the company I built." The silence in the auditorium was absolute. The soft thud of Dorothy's cleaning uniform dropping to the floor revealed a simple but elegant black dress underneath. The harsh fluorescent lights caught the diamond earrings she'd kept concealed. Even the air seemed to change, charged with an almost electric tension. Someone dropped a water bottle. The sound of it hitting the floor and rolling down the slight incline resonated like thunder in the silence. From the back of the auditorium, a single person began to applaud. Lisa Johnson, tears streaming down her face. Others joined, the applause building to a thunderous roar. The executives on stage remained frozen in tableau of horror and disbelief. One woman nearly fainted, catching herself on a nearby chair. The clicking of Dorothy's heels against the wooden stage as she approached the podium created a rhythmic counterpoint to the applause. The sound of authority reclaimed, of power shifting back to its rightful place. The scent of expensive perfume, Dorothy's signature fragrance, replaced the smell of cleaning products that had surrounded her for weeks. Her straight-backed posture and regal bearing transformed the entire atmosphere of the room. Employees who had never met her in person instantly recognized the commanding presence they'd seen in media profiles and company videos. As Dorothy reached the podium, the weight of what was happening settled over the auditorium like a physical force, a collective realization that they were witnessing a moment that would forever change the company and perhaps their industry. History was unfolding before their eyes. and the tension in the air was so thick it could almost be tasted. Dorothy stood at the podium, her presence commanding the room with quiet authority. The projected slides behind her still showed Jason's manipulated charts, a fitting backdrop for what was about to unfold. "Before I continue," she said, her voice steady, "I'd like to share some recordings I've collected during my time as Mary." With a small nod toward Marcus at the back of the auditorium, the speakers crackled to life. Jason's voice filled the room. "The best part is when they think it's their own decision. Much cleaner than formal termination and no risk of age-related lawsuits." Next came Megan's voice. "Increase workload gradually, exclude from key meetings, then express concern about their declining performance. After a few months of this treatment, most will leave voluntarily." Recording after recording played, executives laughing about dinosaurs and outdated models, planning how to push out specific employees while fast-tracking their connected replacements. With each clip, Jason and the other executives seemed to physically shrink on stage. "And my personal favorite," Dorothy said as a final recording played, Jason's voice clearly saying, "The corporate dinosaur just doesn't understand modern work culture. The board's already quietly discussing succession planning. Her time's almost up." When the last recording ended, Dorothy turned to the executives. "Would anyone like to explain these statements, or shall we continue?" No one spoke. No one moved. "I built Wilson Technologies on a simple principle," Dorothy continued, her voice softening with emotion. "Merit, above all else. I believed that in my company, talent would be recognized regardless of age, background, or connections." She gestured to the distorted charts still displayed behind her. "I created the original Wilson Performance Matrix because traditional evaluations were biased against people like me, people from humble beginnings who didn't have prestigious degrees or powerful connections. The system was designed to measure actual contribution, not presentation." Dorothy's eyes swept across the audience, connecting with employees who had suffered under the corrupted system. "What I discovered these past weeks is that the very tools I created to ensure fairness have been perverted to exclude the people they were designed to protect." She clicked to the next slide, one she had prepared with Marcus overnight, showing the original evaluation metrics side by side with the corrupted version. The system wasn't broken, it was hijacked. Dorothy's voice grew stronger, resonating throughout the auditorium. "I share responsibility for this failure. I became so focused on expansion, on competing globally, that I lost sight of our foundation. I delegated without proper oversight. I trusted without verification." The admission stunned the audience. Dorothy Wilson, legendary for her unyielding confidence, was publicly acknowledging her mistake. "The error began with me," she declared, looking directly at Jason. "But it ends today. This company was built to value merit, not connections. Experience, not privilege. Results, not appearances. I failed to protect that vision, but I won't fail again." "For those who think our more experienced employees lack innovation," Dorothy continued, gesturing toward the back of the auditorium, "I'd like to introduce you to what I call the Basement Innovation Lab." The doors opened as Rajiv Patel, Professor Williams, and a dozen other veteran employees entered, carrying prototypes and tablets displaying their work. These were the employees Dorothy had discovered meeting secretly in the basement conference room. These employees, many slated for strategic transition in your plan, have been meeting after hours to collaborate on projects that were rejected through official channels. Let me show you what you've been missing. The screen changed to show Rajiv's quantum encryption solution, the same technology Apex had just launched to industry acclaim. This was developed 9 months ago by Rajiv Patel and submitted through proper channels. It was rejected as not aligned with our future direction. Next came Sarah Lieberman's market research that contradicted official projections, but had proven accurate. This analysis predicted the market shift we're now scrambling to address. It was dismissed as overly cautious thinking. Project after project appeared, all developed by employees who had been marginalized, all representing innovations that could have maintained the company's competitive edge. These people created groundbreaking solutions while being systematically pushed aside, Dorothy said, gesturing to the group. They did it without support, without resources, and without recognition, simply because they care about this company in a way that some in leadership positions clearly don't. The audience erupted in spontaneous applause as the true innovators finally received recognition. The contrast between their genuine contributions and the hollow metrics Jason had presented could not have been more stark. Dorothy let the applause continue for a moment before raising her hand for silence. The next phase of her plan was about to begin. Dorothy turned her attention back to the executives who remained frozen on stage. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that security guards now looked to her for direction rather than to Jason or Megan. "Security," Dorothy said calmly. "Please escort Mr. Mercer, Ms. Taylor, and the individuals whose voices we just heard on those recordings to the lobby. Their access badges and company devices will be collected immediately." The guards moved with swift precision. No resistance was offered. The public exposure had left the executives shell-shocked and compliant. "Your employment is terminated, effective immediately," Dorothy continued as they were led away. "Our legal team will be in touch regarding the misuse of company resources and potential breach of fiduciary duty. Until then, you are not to enter any Wilson Technologies property or contact any employees." Jason finally found his voice as he reached the auditorium door. "You can't just—" "I just did," Dorothy interrupted, her tone leaving no room for debate. "Clean out your desks. You have 30 minutes." The doors closed behind them, leaving a palpable sense of both shock and relief in the auditorium. Dorothy took a deep breath before delivering her next revelation. "While I was disguised as Mary, I wasn't working alone. I had help from someone who has been equally concerned about the direction of our company." She gestured toward Rosa, the receptionist who had been standing quietly at the back of the room. "Rosa, would you please join me?" Murmurs spread through the audience as Rosa walked confidently to the stage. Her stooped posture gone, her movements suddenly graceful and assured. When she reached Dorothy's side, she removed her own disguise. The gray-streaked wig, the thick glasses, the makeup that had added years to her appearance. "I'd like to introduce Rosalinda Wilson Suarez," Dorothy announced. "My cousin, co-founder of this company and silent partner for the past 25 years." The revelation sent shockwaves through the audience. Rosalinda had been a phantom figure in company lore, mentioned in early press but gradually fading from the public story as Dorothy became the sole face of Wilson Technologies. "While I focused on technology and growth," Dorothy explained, "Rosa developed our human resources philosophy and cultural foundation, principles that have been systematically dismantled in recent years." Rosalinda took the microphone. "When we started hearing troubling reports from former employees, we decided to investigate personally. As the receptionist no one truly sees, I witnessed firsthand how our company values were being corrupted." She smiled at Dorothy. "Together, we built this company. Together, we will restore it." Dorothy addressed the room again. Effective immediately, Rosalinda Wilson Suarez takes her rightful place as Chief Operations Officer of Wilson Technologies. Her first task will be to rebuild our Human Resources Department from the ground up. With Rosalinda by her side, Dorothy's commanding presence softened slightly. For the first time in her public career, she allowed herself to show genuine emotion. "I owe all of you an apology," she said, her voice thick with regret. "I created systems that were weaponized against you. I was absent when I should have been vigilant. I failed to protect the very culture I intended to build." The admission hung in the air, powerful in its vulnerability, compelling in its honesty. "My success story has often been framed as a triumph of individual determination," she continued. "But the truth is more complicated. I had help, I had mentors, and somewhere along the way, I forgot that. I became so focused on achievement that I lost sight of the community that makes achievement meaningful." She gestured to the employees gathered before her. "The responsibility for what happened in this company is partially mine. The failure of oversight was mine, and the work of rebuilding trust will be mine as well." In that moment of honest vulnerability, Dorothy Wilson appeared not diminished but somehow larger. A true leader capable of acknowledging mistakes and committed to making them right. The auditorium remained eerily silent as Dorothy surveyed the employees before her, some hopeful, others apprehensive, all waiting to see what would follow the dramatic expulsions. This was the moment that would define Wilson Technology's future. True restructuring, Dorothy began, isn't about cutting costs or inflating executive bonuses. It's about recognizing value where others have failed to see it. She gestured toward Lisa Johnson, who sat rigidly in the third row, still processing the morning's events. "Lisa, would you please join me on stage?" Lisa moved hesitantly toward the stage, her expression guarded after years of being undermined. As she reached Dorothy, the CEO took both her hands in a gesture of profound respect. "This woman," Dorothy announced, "developed our most profitable security protocol while simultaneously being excluded from critical meetings and having her contributions attributed to others. Her most recent assessment labeled her as resistant to innovation, despite generating more viable ideas than her entire department combined." Dorothy turned to face Lisa directly. More importantly, she has shown extraordinary dedication, scheduling chemotherapy appointments around work commitments rather than risk being seen as unreliable. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Lisa's eyes widened in surprise that Dorothy knew this private struggle. "Lisa Johnson is our new Director of Innovation, effective immediately," Dorothy declared. "Her first task will be establishing our innovation protocol, with full authority to implement the remarkable ideas developed by our veteran employees that have been systematically shelved." Lisa stood stunned, tears streaming down her face as applause erupted around her. "And yes," Dorothy added, "our health insurance policy will be revised today to ensure uninterrupted coverage for all employees regardless of status changes or medical conditions." "We've been operating under a false premise," Dorothy continued once the applause subsided. "The idea that experience and innovation are somehow opposed. Today, we're launching the Intergenerational Mentorship Initiative." She gestured to Professor Williams and several younger employees. "Each division will create partnership teams pairing experienced staff with newer employees, not to replace one with the other, but to blend complementary strengths." The screen behind her displayed a new organizational chart, one that emphasized collaboration rather than hierarchy. "Innovation doesn't come from homogeneity," Dorothy explained. "It emerges from the friction between different perspectives, between theory and experience, between ambition and wisdom. We need all of these voices." The transformation in the room was palpable. The scent of tension and fear that had permeated the auditorium just an hour before had dissipated, replaced by something electric and alive. Employees who had entered with hunched shoulders now sat upright. Those who had avoided eye contact now engaged actively. The sound of spontaneous conversation bubbled through the room, ideas being exchanged, connections forming across departmental lines that had previously been impenetrable. Laughter, genuine, relieved laughter, punctuated the discussions. Most striking was the visual transformation of the employees themselves. Color had returned to faces that had been pale with stress. Smiles emerged on faces that had been carefully neutral for months or years. Hands that had been tightly clasped now gestured animatedly as people spoke with renewed passion about their work. Dorothy watched this sensory metamorphosis with quiet satisfaction. Beyond the policies and promotions, beyond the structural changes, this was what truly mattered. The restoration of human dignity and creative spirit that had once been the company's greatest strength. 2 weeks after the dramatic revelation, Dorothy sat at her dining table surrounded by family, her daughter Aisha, son-in-law Michael, and grandchildren Marcus and Zoe. It was the first real family dinner she'd hosted in over a year. The elegant penthouse, usually pristine and impersonal, now bore signs of genuine habitation. Family photos recently unpacked from storage, a child's drawing from Zoe magneted to the refrigerator, Marcus's laptop open on the coffee table. "I still can't believe you pulled off that undercover operation, Mom," Aisha said, passing a bowl of mashed potatoes. "Though I'm not entirely surprised. You've always been determined." Dorothy caught the slight hesitation. "You mean stubborn and obsessive," she corrected gently. Your words, not mine. Aisha smiled, but there was history behind her eyes. Missed birthdays, abbreviated holidays, calls that went to voicemail during critical business negotiations. I've been reflecting on what truly matters, Dorothy admitted, looking around the table. I built a company that values merit and innovation, but I failed to apply those same values to my family life. I treated relationships as secondary priorities that could wait. She reached for her grandson's hand. Thank you, Marcus, for showing me what I was missing. While I was busy protecting my company, I was neglecting my most important legacy. Dorothy raised her glass. To second chances, in business and in family. The following morning, Dorothy called Janet Chen into her office. Her executive assistant of 20 years entered cautiously, clearly expecting termination. I found this in the executive files, Dorothy said, sliding a folder across her desk. Inside were detailed notes Janet had kept documenting the systematic exclusion of older employees and those from humble backgrounds. Janet's eyes widened in recognition. I was gathering evidence, she explained, her voice unsteady. It started small, comments in meetings, patterns in promotions. By the time I realized the full extent, I was already complicit. I helped schedule the meetings where these decisions were made. Dorothy studied her longtime assistant. Why didn't you come to me directly? You were increasingly isolated, Janet admitted. Jason and Megan controlled access to you. They implied my position would be reevaluated if I bothered you with operational details. Dorothy considered this, then made her decision. You have two choices, Janet. You can resign today with full benefits and a reference. Or you can join our new ethics compliance team and help ensure this never happens again. Janet straightened. I'd like to stay and make things right. Everyone deserves a second chance, Dorothy nodded, even those who made mistakes by staying silent. Later that afternoon, Dorothy visited the company's newly established innovation lab, formerly the basement conference room where experienced employees had met in secret, now officially designated as sacred space for collaboration across generations. Professor Williams looked up from a holographic display where he was demonstrating quantum computing principles to a group of fascinated young programmers. Our new, Sensible Innovation initiative needs a director, Dorothy said without preamble. Someone who understands both theoretical possibilities and practical limitations. Someone who can bridge traditional approaches with emerging technologies. Professor Williams smiled. Are you offering me my old job back? I'm offering you a better one, Dorothy replied. Full creative control, reporting directly to Lisa Johnson. The kind of position that should have been yours years ago. I thought I was too old for innovation, he said, referencing his dismissal. That was our loss, Dorothy acknowledged. Now we're correcting course. Experience isn't a liability. It's our most undervalued asset. As Professor Williams accepted with a firm handshake, Dorothy reflected on how many other talented individuals had been cast aside in corporate America's youth obsession. The work of restoration was just beginning, both in her company and in her life. 3 months after what employees now called the Revelation Day, Wilson Technologies had undergone a metamorphosis that defied industry expectations. Quarterly reports showed a stunning 30% increase in productivity across all departments. More impressively, patent applications had doubled, with several breakthrough innovations already attracting attention from major clients. The Intergenerational Mentorship Initiative had produced unexpected synergies. Veteran employees provided contextual wisdom and institutional knowledge, while younger staff contributed technical agility and fresh perspectives. Teams structured with deliberate age diversity consistently outperformed homogeneous groups in problem-solving exercises and project outcomes. Most telling was the transformation in workplace culture. Employee satisfaction scores had risen from concerning lows to all-time highs. Absenteeism dropped dramatically, while voluntary weekend collaboration sessions became so popular they required sign-up sheets. The competitive tension that had pervaded the company had been replaced by something more valuable, collective ambition united by shared purpose. We didn't just survive a crisis, Lisa Johnson told a trade publication. "We rediscovered our core identity. When people feel valued for their actual contributions rather than their demographics, they invest themselves fully in the work." The physical workspace underwent equally dramatic changes. Drawing on her unique perspective as Mary, Dorothy had noticed countless inefficiencies and barriers in the office design. "When you clean floors for a living, you see exactly how people really use spaces," Dorothy explained to the architectural team. The executive floor was isolated both physically and culturally from the departments doing the actual innovation. The renovated headquarters eliminated the traditional executive floor entirely. Leadership offices were now distributed throughout the building, integrated with their teams. Glass walls replaced solid barriers, while comfortable collaboration spaces encouraged spontaneous interaction between departments that had previously operated in silos. Most symbolically, the previously hidden basement conference room, where veteran employees had secretly developed innovations, was transformed into a showcase innovation lab visible from the main entrance, signaling the company's new priorities to everyone who entered the building. The quarterly shareholders' meeting, typically a dry recitation of figures, became a standing room-only event as investors clamored to understand the company's remarkable turnaround. Dorothy stood confidently before the projection showing the company's stock price, down initially after the leadership shakeup, but now climbing steadily past previous highs. "The markets initially reacted with uncertainty to our great renewal, as the media has dubbed it," she acknowledged. "But the results speak for themselves." Chief Financial Officer Amar Okafor elaborated. "By retaining our experienced talent rather than pushing them out, we've avoided millions in hiring and training costs. The innovations developed by our previously marginalized teams have opened 3 new market segments with minimal development investment." Even the most skeptical shareholders were silenced by the numbers on the screen and the palpable energy that now pervaded the company. What had begun as a crisis had transformed into what business schools were already calling a case study in enlightened corporate renewal. Dignity Days became a monthly tradition at Wilson Technologies, transforming corporate culture in ways no policy manual could achieve. On the first Wednesday of each month, every executive, including Dorothy herself, stepped away from their offices to work alongside support staff. The CFO answered phones at reception. The head of engineering helped in the cafeteria. Directors assisted maintenance teams. "Leadership isn't about status," Dorothy explained when journalists inevitably asked about the unusual practice. "It's about understanding every aspect of your organization. You can't truly value what you don't understand." What began as a symbolic gesture quickly produced tangible benefits. Executives identified inefficiencies they would never have noticed from corner offices. Support staff offered insights that revolutionized processes. Most importantly, the artificial barriers between different roles began to dissolve as mutual respect replaced hierarchical deference. Dorothy still donned her cleaning uniform on Dignity Days, methodically polishing the glass walls she once built to separate executives from everyone else. The familiar scent of lemon cleaner now evoked not humiliation, but reconciliation, a sensory reminder of her journey back to the company's core values. Most striking was the changed atmosphere as she moved through the building. Where Mary had been invisible, Dorothy as cleaner was greeted warmly, included in conversations. Employees stopped to chat, sharing ideas and concerns without reservation. The gentle swoosh of her cloth against glass became background music to genuine human connection, a rhythmic reminder that no role was beneath dignity. The Future First Scholarship Fund, launched with Dorothy's personal contribution of $10 million, quickly matched by the company and expanded through voluntary executive salary reductions. Unlike typical corporate scholarships, it targeted specifically the children of service staff, maintenance workers, and administrative personnel. "My mother was a domestic worker who dreamed of education for her children," Dorothy announced at the launch ceremony. "Those dreams shouldn't depend on luck or exceptional circumstances. They should be the standard." The first class of scholars included the daughter of a Wilson Technologies janitor, now studying biomedical engineering, the son of a cafeteria worker pursuing computer science, and 18 other students who represented the first generation in their families to attend college. Most revolutionary was the program's mentorship component. Each scholar was paired with a senior executive who would guide them through both education and early career stages, creating pathways that had never before existed. The company that had once systematically limited opportunity was now methodically extending it, redefining what corporate responsibility meant in the modern era. 1 year later, Wilson Technologies won Best Workplace for All Generations, boasting 96% employee retention and becoming the industry standard for ethical leadership. "We didn't just change policies," Dorothy said. "We changed fundamental assumptions about value in corporate America." At the awards ceremony, Dorothy rejected traditional executive photos. Instead, she gathered employees from every level and background on stage, from interns to Professor Williams, maintenance staff to directors. She positioned herself between Rosa and Lisa, surrounded by previously overlooked employees whose innovations now drove company success. "This isn't a photo op," Dorothy declared. "This is our actual leadership structure, distributed wisdom from every corner of our organization." The image, showing diverse employees with arms linked across generational lines, defined corporate transformation on magazine covers worldwide. Behind them, the once mocked phrase glowed, "Experience is the best software that exists. It cannot be hacked, deleted, or replaced." Now the company's defining philosophy, it appeared on merchandise, walls, and orientation materials. As Dorothy, Rosalinda, and Lisa concluded with a collaborative roundtable, Dorothy delivered her most quoted wisdom. "Never underestimate a black grandmother with a mop or a pen to sign her revolution." Dorothy had learned twice, first from necessity, then by choice, that true leadership means ensuring everyone is truly seen.